leadership, try to get on the agenda before the high-energy motivational speakers. Then you don't have to compete as much. Thank you, folks. Thank you for inviting me this evening. I have the pleasure of leading the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, the largest child welfare agency in Canada, where I've been for 2 years, permanently since June of this year. When I started in child welfare, I had no glasses. I now have 2 pairs of glasses. I used to be able to read font 8. Now I'm at font 24, just as an FYI. But that's all part of becoming wiser, my colleagues tell me. I started a cast many, many, many years ago, and I left. I said I would never work in child welfare again. It's a huge part of my story. I didn't want to be part of the system. I didn't see anything good coming from the work being done with children and youth. I worked in the group homes. I was a child and youth worker, and I spent 3 years there. And some of those young people who I worked with were 10 years old, 11 years old. One of them called me about 1.5 years ago. She's 46 now, and talked to me about one of the things that she remembered most about me was when I worked on the weekends, she said, Sunday nights used to make sure we all had dinner together. There were always 8 kids living in that group home, and how important that was for her and how she did that with her kids now. And that was just the job, but the impact, and I know folks on the panel talked about that, the impact you have on people, on your colleagues, on the people we provide service to, how important that is. When I left child welfare, I went to the children's mental health sector, worked for the Toronto District School Board. I actually worked for the Mississauga Hospital here in Toronto. I don't think it's called that anymore. And it was a little house. They had a outpatient clinic at Burnhamthorpe and Dixie, and worked there with families. I had the privilege of being able to move every 2 or 3 years. I just moved every 2 or 3 years in jobs. Didn't have a commitment of mortgage or the 3 kids that I have now that won't leave my house. They're in their 20s. One's a social worker, actually, my oldest. And during this time, I had contact. I was a referral source for child welfare. And when I would call agencies or child welfare agencies, it reminded me as to why I would never go back. The experience that I had, the interactions I had, the worries I had about families, children, youth, and families I was referring. Thank you. And during this time, I started my Bachelor of Social Work part-time because I was having a bunch of kids at Ryerson, TMU. And I saw education as an opportunity to improve my skills. I saw an education, as we say, move up the food chain. It would give me more opportunities in my career moving forward. I always say everything I learned about crisis management, difficult situations, I learned in the group homes. But I did my Bachelor of Social Work at Ryerson. I later went on to do my master's. It's funny because my kids, I've always thought about education. It's not something you start when you're 18 and you're done when you're 21 or whatever. It's continuous. Like, the more you learn, I think the better, formally, informally. In my final year, I had to do a placement, and a professor I had there, Carol Baines, said to me, "You should do a placement in child welfare." And I laughed. I said, "That's a system that requires an overhaul." You hear that a lot, don't we, Beth and Ramona? An overhaul. She said to me, "That's actually why you should be there." And I think I laughed again probably, but I took her advice. I didn't know at the time, until years later, but Dr. Baines recognized something in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. So I took a placement in 1998 at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, and lo and behold, after that, they hired me. And like many folks who start in child welfare, we always say, we won't be here forever. In my first position, I was a family service worker. I worked out of their Scarborough branch on Kennedy Road, and I know some of the workers are here today, which is awesome. I worked with marginalized children and youth and their families, and I quickly realized the need for families to be connected to their communities and community resources and the amazing resources where my social work colleagues were working. I developed relationships with people at agencies like Tropicana, the YWCA, then Aisling Discoveries, which is now Strides, and so on. And please note, I said I developed relationships with people, not agencies, because what I needed at that time in my work as social work, I was talking to somebody about this tonight, is connections to people. I needed to be able to pick up the phone. Okay, we didn't actually have text message at that time, but I needed to be able to pick up the phone and call people and say, I've got a family I'm working with who may benefit. And that people relationship and relationships are everything. I took on students, I mentored new staff, and I learned from that. Although folks thanked me for mentoring them and students for taking them on, I learned more about myself in terms of my leadership. I didn't actually call it leadership at that time, but I learned more about myself. In 2003, I had the privilege of developing the first domestic violence team in child welfare in Canada, and that's expanded to 2 teams at this point, which is really exciting. And for folks who don't know, 50% of the referrals that come across the Child Welfare Agency are actually family violence, domestic violence related. And I know, Beth, you've got an awesome program out here in Peel, working a collaborative program in Peel, and we have something similar, not as sophisticated, in Toronto. In 2009, I signed up to be an anti-oppression trainer for the province, for the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. And I did this for me because I knew as a white woman, I had a responsibility to learn, feel discomfort, and also be an ally. I have to tell you, as a white woman, being in front of the class of an equity training course has been one of the most challenging situations for me and taught me more than I can ever imagine. I guess what I'm saying is you need to do things that make you uncomfortable and challenge you, because the easy things are easy. The challenging things, for me anyways, is what has helped me grow. I know there was a question about EDI today. We call it EDI, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, at our organization, and what that looks like. And for me, EDI is holding, I feel, a responsibility to hold white people, dominance, whatever the term is you want to use, accountable. That's where I feel I use the most of my influence is my white colleagues, family, friends, and colleagues. My journey is likely very similar or different to others in this room. And what I would come to learn in the last few years, as Donald McGannon says, is leadership is not a position. It's a process, it's learning, it's self-reflection, and it can be in any way, shape, or form. It's where you take it and what you make of it. It's not a supervisor, it's not a manager or a CEO, although there are leadership, of course, responsibilities and qualities that come with that. Each one of us is a leader, and the term I also like to use, an ambassador. We are ambassadors for social worker. Wherever we are in the world, we are ambassadors to each other, whether we know each other, whether we work in the same sectors or not. My journey's been influenced by my past. I come from a family who likely should have been involved with the child welfare sector, and my brother says, I'm the only social worker in the family. They're all like engineers and other types of professionals. And my brother says, how is it we didn't end up like involved with a child welfare agency? And I also look in the mirror, then I have to explain to him what that means because he doesn't understand about his privilege. And then my family generally stops asking me any questions about social work at that point. But we were very privileged. I grew up in a very privileged house, mainly because of my identity. My identity as a white woman, as a city person, as a social worker, as a child and youth worker, as a mother, by my education, formal and informal, has shaped who I am. It's not one thing. It's not a magical thing. I know there was a question around, what would you do? And we're all often looking. I try to be as practical as I can when people ask leadership questions, but there's no magic answer to my knowledge that makes one person a leader or whatever that looks like. In fact, many of the leaders I see are most of the frontline workers that I get to interact with. My ability to reflect, to be willing to learn, to listen to others. White people have a hard time listening. I don't know if you've noticed that. And the desire to build relationships has been a huge influence. Like many who have spoken, I've struggled with imposter syndrome and at times have gone on Charity Village looking for other opportunities. And I think it's okay to feel frustrated and feel tired and feel exhausted and get some rest, text a friend, have a conversation, and then we get back on and we start again. What have I learned? My failures have influenced my successes. Where I've not done well, whether it's with a family, whether it's with children and youth or my job or with a supervisor, how do I learn from that? Whether it's, as I said, with service users, my colleagues, or as the CEO, my failures influence my successes. Who I thought were challenging supervisors or managers that I had in the past actually taught me more than I realized. I used to sit on a team, and next door was the team with the fun supervisor. I had that supervisor who wanted us to follow processes and practices. And boy, did I understand about risk management and how important that is, that we follow what's in front of us and stay in our lanes in terms of understanding what our job is. The fun thing doesn't last forever, and it doesn't necessarily help us grow as individuals. I also learned that being liked is a bonus. Being liked is not necessarily a quality that we all want to strive for. But being respected, being a good communicator, and bringing clarity. And I've learned more about clarity in the last 2 years and the importance of that as a leader. And of course, building relationships, but not building relationships with the people who want to work with you, building relationships with your critics. And let me tell you, in child welfare, we have a lot of critics. So there's lots of options and opportunities. It's easy to go out and build a relationship with those who want to work with you. It's harder to build those relationships with those who don't, those who have certain beliefs about you, those beliefs that may be true, because you need to hear hard things. So I would challenge folks and get you to think about who are your biggest critics, who are unusual partners for you, who are unusual sectors for you that you should be building those relationships. When people say to me, and I hear this, "You're a great leader," or "You've taught me so much," I always come back and say, give me an example of that. Tell me what I did. Number one, I want to make sure I know and I'm doing more of it. And these are some of the things I've heard. You aren't afraid to have hard conversations. Hard conversations are critical conversations. Let's change that word from hard to critical. If you're not having those, I don't know how authentic those conversations are. I've had folks say, "You're the only person that gave me real feedback and helped me work on the areas I needed to work." Nothing worse as a manager when you have someone who's got some challenges and you're talking about them but not with them. So how do you ensure you're having those conversations and leaving people intact? And when I say that, make sure you're having those conversations as a leader, as a supportive way, not a, "By the way, I'm going to tell you after a year while we're doing your PA all these worries I've had with you, but what's the process you've been doing to support your folks?" I've heard folks say to me, "I trust your decisions because you've done the work." I have credibility. I've been in the group homes. I've knocked on doors. I know child welfare workers, we knock on doors. We have some really critical conversations with family about child safety. And I've also had folks say to me, "I don't like the decisions you make, but I trust you're making the decisions that are right for us because you know the work." I was in a meeting and someone asked me a question, and I'm pretty okay at saying, "I actually don't know the answer to that, and I'm going to call a friend." Number one, because I don't know everything. No one knows everything. And I'm also humble in the sense of, I think it's more important that we call a friend, get a different perspective, I can get you the right answer, and so on. I've always thought about how teams, people who generally want to come and work for me when I was a supervisor, often said, "I come to you because I know you always look at the work and how we can change and do it better." And that's not a belief in child welfare. Most of the child welfare leaders that I know, we're all thinking about how we can do this work better. We should always be thinking about how we can do this work better. And somebody said to me just last week, "What I really appreciate you, Lisa, is you always remind us of our mission and why we're here." And if we don't keep that at the center point, particularly in our work, we can drift, and it doesn't help families, it doesn't help children, youth, and families when we drift. Our collective goal is not just to advance within our individual careers, but to broaden our impact as leaders in the communities we serve. Leadership extends beyond titles and roles, and it's an outlook, a mindset, a commitment to growth and positive change. The theme of empowering, of course, and elevating and excelling challenges each of us to look within continual improvement, and actively engage with our workplaces, our organizations, and our communities. Empowerment doesn't stop with ourselves. We have to also uplift those around us, particularly those or folks from diverse communities, and diverse is a broad term that we know work and live. It's our responsibility to create opportunities for all, especially those underrepresented, and to build pathways that allow others to thrive. If we do this, we all grow. When I prepared for the Chief Operating Officer position, which is the one I was in before this, I reached out to a person who I know does executive coaching. When I told her I'd pay for her service so I could prepare, she refused to take my money, which was a bit of a bonus. And she said, I'll do this for free on one condition. She says, what you learn from me, you need to share it with others, especially those who don't have access to formal coaching, training, and support. And that's what I did. Being a CEO is an incredible responsibility. It's also one of the most isolating positions I've ever been in. It was interesting because, like now when I walk into a lunchroom, people stop talking. They don't talk anymore. Everyone watches what they say in front of me. And when Joji reached out to me to speak tonight, folks like Joji always start with emails. They say, I know you're really busy, but do you have a second? We're all busy. Everybody's busy. So my busy is just different to somebody else's busy. So I want to pay attention to that. This is particularly challenging, of course, in a hybrid world where we want to balance the needs of employees and pay attention to the value of interactions with colleagues. So how do I ensure as a CEO that I'm always available or available-ish, or folks know who to go to be available? My favorite time of the day at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, and I go into the office quite a bit because I mentioned those 3 kids of mine who often work at home and take up all my internet. So I tend to go into the office as often as I can. My favorite time of is morning and quitting time. And why is that? Because I get in the elevator with staff. A couple of weeks ago, I got in the elevator. I park on P1, often park on P1 because I'm in early. And I met another staff person there. I didn't know her. She's an intake worker. She was heading to the 3rd floor, our intake department, where I spent a lot of my career. And I said to her, I pushed the button for her, and I said, you're heading to the 3rd floor intake? I said, I spent a lot of time there. And she says to me, I've seen your name. She was a racialized woman. She said, I've seen your name on cases. I was like, oh gosh. I said, don't judge me on those. She said, of course. She says, I said, it's always good. She said, it was always good. To which I said, my work was always good. I said, well, you have to say that. I'm the CEO, of course. What I said to her is, whatever you do, make sure you do it better than I did. That's my best hope for you. What she said to me is, seeing your name on these cases and then seeing you at our all-staff meeting makes me realize we all have opportunities to move and grow. And when she got off the elevator, I felt this incredible weight of my role. I felt the incredible weight of my role, my position, the words that I say, my name on files, and so on. But I also had great hope for the future of our staff, our organization, and our service, and the impact on our service workers. If you were to ask me today what my main job is, most people who say that to me, what do you see as your primary job? Of course, I have an organization I lead that has a mandate, but I see my main job as preparing the organization and preparing the CEO seat with the next round of leaders. My entire being is spent ensuring that when I leave, when I retire, however or whenever I go, that seat is ready. I mean, you're never fully ready, but that seat in the organization is ready for the next round of leaders. And you can call that succession planning, whatever you want to call it, but I see it as my responsibility to ensure that this organization, the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, is ready for the next round of leaders who should make it better than how I've left it. Anyways, I want to thank everyone. Thank you for your dedication to our community, for your commitment to empowering, elevating, and excelling. And thank you for Joji and MASWO for having me this evening.